My name is Ignacio, and at 29 years old, I thought I had this whole adult thing figured out. As a civil engineer with a stable job, I had been renting a nice apartment from my parents for 3 years, always paying on time and taking care of the place like it was my own. Little did I know that the people I trusted most would betray me in a way I never saw coming, using my responsible nature against me, while enabling my unemployed brother at my expense. Before I get into how my parents betrayed my trust, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family take advantage of your kindness. Growing up, I always had a pretty close relationship with my parents, Tom and Nancy. They were strict but fair, and they instilled in me the values of hard work, responsibility, and financial independence. My father worked as an accountant, while my mother taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were smart with their money and taught me to be the same way. From an early age, I was the kid who saved my allowance, who planned for the future. I worked hard in school, maintained a high GPA, and eventually earned a scholarship to study civil engineering at the state university. My parents were incredibly proud when I graduated with honors, and even prouder when I landed a good job at a respected engineering firm right out of college. About 5 years ago, my parents decided to diversify their retirement investments by purchasing a few rental properties in our city. They had saved diligently over the years and consulted with a financial advisor who suggested real estate as a stable investment option. They bought 3 properties: a small single-family home across town, a duplex near the university, and a 2-bedroom apartment in a modern complex just 10 minutes from my workplace. The apartment was perfect for me. Spacious, well-maintained with modern appliances, and a great location. When I mentioned I was looking for a new place 3 years ago, my parents suggested I rent from them. It seemed like a win-win. They would have a reliable tenant, and I would have a nice place to live. We agreed on a fair market price, signed a formal lease, and everything was above board and professional. "We want to treat you like any other tenant," my dad had said while we signed the paperwork. "No special treatment, no family discounts. This is business, and it's good practice for both of us." I respected that approach and appreciated that they were treating me like an adult. I paid my rent on time every month, kept the place in excellent condition, and even made some minor improvements at my own expense, like installing a better shower head and updating some of the light fixtures. Then, there was my older brother, Walter. At 32, Walter was the complete opposite of me in almost every way. Where I was responsible, he was reckless. Where I saved, he spent. Where I planned, he lived moment to moment. Don't get me wrong, Walter has his good qualities. He's charismatic, funny, and can be incredibly generous when he has the means. The problem is, he rarely has the means, because he can't seem to hold down a job for more than 6 months at a time. Walter had bounced from job to job throughout his 20s. Retail food service sales call centers, never sticking with anything long enough to build a career. He'd either quit because he was bored, get fired for tardiness, or simply stop showing up. Between jobs, he'd crash with friends, girlfriends, or most frequently move back in with our parents. My parents had always been softer on Walter. They made excuses for him, saying he was finding his path or not meant for traditional employment. They'd let him stay rent-free at their house, give him spending money, and even pay off his debts when they got too overwhelming. I'd expressed my concerns about their enabling behavior multiple times, but they always dismissed me. "You don't understand Walter, like we do," my mom would say. "He's sensitive and creative. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world like you are." I'd tried to maintain a good relationship with my brother despite our differences. We'd grab beers, occasionally watch sports together, and I'd listen to his latest get-rich-quick scheme without judgment, at least not out loud. But I'd always maintained firm boundaries. I wouldn't lend him money, let him crash at my place for extended periods, or bail him out of his self-created problems. This had caused some tension, but I believed it was healthier for both of us in the long run. About 4 months ago, Walter lost his latest job at a marketing firm, where he'd been working as an entry-level account coordinator. According to him, his boss had it out for him and couldn't handle someone with fresh ideas. According to the friend who'd helped him get the job, Walter had missed multiple client meetings and submitted work late consistently. As usual, Walter moved back in with our parents. I visited for Sunday dinner regularly and noticed he seemed to be settling in rather than actively job hunting. His stuff was spread throughout the house he'd taken over the garage for his home gym, and he spent most days playing video games or binging Netflix shows. "How's the job search going?" I asked him during one of these dinners. "It's tough out there, bro," he replied without looking up from his phone. "Nobody's hiring in my field right now." "What exactly is your field?" I asked, genuinely curious, since it seemed to change monthly. "Creative strategy," he said vaguely. "I'm waiting for the right opportunity. I'm not going to settle for just any job." I bit my tongue to avoid pointing out that any job might be better than no job at all. Instead, I changed the subject and helped my mom clear the dinner dishes. Little did I know that my parents' patience with Walter was wearing thin too, but not in the way I expected. Rather than pushing him to stand on his own 2 feet, they were formulating a plan that would soon upend my life completely. The first hint that something was off came about 2 months ago. I was having lunch with my parents at their favorite diner, and my mom made an odd comment that I didn't fully register at the time. "Family helps family, don't you think, Ignacio?" she said out of nowhere while spreading butter on her bread. "Sure," I replied, absently scanning the menu. "That's what family is for. We've always believed that those who are more fortunate should help those who are struggling," my father added, "especially when it's temporary." I nodded, thinking they were making a general statement about family values. I didn't realize they were floating a trial balloon for what was to come. A week later, they stopped by my apartment, unexpectedly, on a Saturday afternoon. This wasn't completely unusual. They sometimes dropped by to say hello if they were in the area. But their behavior during this visit was strange. "This really is a spacious place," my dad said, walking around and looking at everything with new eyes, despite having been there dozens of times before. "The spare bedroom is quite large," my mom noted, stepping into my home office where I kept my desk computer and drafting table for when I brought work home. "You don't really need all this space for just an office, do you?" "I use it pretty regularly," I said, confused by her question. "I often work from home in the evenings and weekends." My dad was measuring the living room with his eyes, even pacing it out with his feet at one point. "What are you doing?" I finally asked. "Oh, just curious about the dimensions," he said casually. "Hey, what's your schedule like these days?" "Are you at work most weekdays?" "Standard 9 to 5. Sometimes later, if we have a project deadline." I answered, growing increasingly suspicious. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," my mom jumped in. "Just wondering when you're usually home. And when you're not." They left shortly after, but the strange visit left me uneasy. That evening, I got a text from my mom inviting me to dinner the following Friday. "We need to discuss something with you," she added, which only increased my anxiety. I called my friend Aaron that night to tell him about my parents' odd behavior. "Dude, they're definitely planning something," Aaron said after hearing the story. "And it probably involves your apartment. But what could they be planning? They own the place, but I have a lease. They can't just make changes without telling me. Maybe they want to sell it. Or maybe they're going to raise your rent." Both possibilities seemed unlikely. My parents had talked about holding on to their rental properties until retirement, and we had agreed my rent would stay stable for the duration of the lease, which wasn't up for renewal for another 9 months. "Just be prepared for something unexpected on Friday," Aaron advised. "And remember, no matter what they say, you have tenant rights, family or not." My unease grew throughout the week. On Wednesday, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off a book I'd borrowed from my dad. Walter wasn't home, but as I was leaving, I noticed something in the garage that made my stomach drop. Several moving boxes labeled Walter's stuff were stacked against the wall, partially packed. I almost confronted my parents right then, but decided to wait for Friday's dinner. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe Walter had finally found his own place and was getting ready to move out. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that wasn't the case. Friday arrived, and I drove to my parents' house with a knot in my stomach. Walter wasn't at dinner, which I found suspicious, but I didn't mention it. We made small talk through the appetizer and main course, and I kept waiting for them to bring up whatever they wanted to discuss. Finally, as my mom served dessert, I couldn't take it anymore. "So what did you want to talk to me about?" I asked directly. My parents exchanged glances. "Well," my dad began, "we've been thinking about Walter's situation." "Here it comes," I thought. "He's really struggling right now," my mom continued. "Living here with us isn't ideal for a man his age. He needs his own space to get back on his feet." "I agree," I said cautiously. "He should definitely get his own place." "That's the thing," my dad said, leaning forward. "He can't afford his own place right now. But we've come up with a solution that will help him out temporarily." I felt my heart rate increase. "What kind of solution?" "Your apartment has 2 bedrooms," my mom said, as if this was a revelation. "You only use one for sleeping. The other is just an office." I stared at them, the implications sinking in. "Are you suggesting Walter move in with me?" "Just until he gets back on his feet," my dad assured me. "A month or 2, at most." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I need my space. I need my office." And frankly, Walter and I would drive each other crazy living together. "It wouldn't be for long," my mom pleaded. "And he'd be respectful of your space." I laughed in disbelief. "Mom, this is Walter we're talking about. He's never respected anyone's space in his life." "That's not fair," my dad said, his tone hardening. "Your brother is going through a rough patch. We all need to pitch in." "I'm happy to help Walter in other ways," I countered. "I can help him with his resume, connect him with people in my network, even drive him to interviews. But I'm not living with him." The conversation went in circles for another 30 minutes. My parents insisted it would be temporary. I insisted it was a bad idea. We reached an impasse, and I left feeling frustrated, but believing I'd made my position clear. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I came home from work exhausted after a long day at the construction site. As I trudged up the stairs to my second-floor apartment, all I could think about was taking a hot shower and ordering takeout. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and froze. The living room was filled with boxes, suitcases, and miscellaneous items I immediately recognized as Walter's possessions. His guitar stand was set up in the corner. His collection of sports memorabilia was stacked on my coffee table, and his worn leather jacket was thrown over my couch. For a moment, I thought I'd entered the wrong apartment, but then I heard the shower running. Dumbfounded, I stood in the middle of my living room trying to process what was happening. 10 minutes later, the bathroom door opened, and Walter emerged in a cloud of steam wearing nothing but a towel around his waist. "Hey bro," he said casually, as if this situation was completely normal. "Hope you don't mind I used your body wash. Mine's still packed somewhere." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my shock turning to anger. "Why are your things in my apartment? Why are you in my apartment?" Walter looked genuinely confused. "Mom and Dad didn't tell you I'm moving in for a bit. They gave me the key this morning." My blood boiled. Without another word to Walter, I pulled out my phone and called my father. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Ignacio, I was just about to call you." "Why is Walter in my apartment?" I interrupted, struggling to keep my voice steady. "We discussed this on Friday," he said, as if I was being unreasonable. "No, we didn't. You suggested it and I said no, very clearly. Your mother and I thought about it, and this really is the best solution for everyone." He continued, ignoring my objection. "Walter needs a stable environment to get back on his feet, and your spare bedroom is just sitting there." "It's not just sitting there. It's my home office. And this is my apartment that I pay rent for." "Actually, it's our apartment that you rent from us," my father corrected, his tone cooling. and as the landlords, we've decided to allow Walter to stay there temporarily." I was speechless for a moment, trying to wrap my head around what he was saying. "That's not how this works, Dad. I have a lease. You can't just move someone else in without my consent. This is a family matter, Ignacio. The lease is just a formality between us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you just gave him a key to my apartment without asking me? Without even telling me?" "We knew you'd overreact like this," my mother's voice chimed in. Apparently, I was on speakerphone. "We thought it would be easier if Walter was already settled by the time you got home from work." "Easier for whom?" I asked incredulously. "For everyone," she replied. "This way there's no big confrontation or drama. It's done. Walter is there, and you two can figure out how to live together harmoniously, like brothers should." I glanced over at Walter, who had put on sweatpants and was rummaging through my refrigerator as if he owned the place. "This is a complete violation of my privacy and my rights as a tenant," I said, trying to appeal to their sense of fairness. "You know Walter. He's irresponsible, he's messy, and he doesn't respect boundaries. Remember when he stayed with Aunt Linda and broke her antique vase? Or when he crashed at his friend Doug's place and spilled wine all over his white couch? That was years ago," my mom dismissed. "Walter has matured." From the kitchen, I heard the distinctive crash of breaking glass, followed by Walter's muttered curse. "Sorry, bro," he called out. "I'll clean it up later." I closed my eyes and counted to 10. "How long is temporarily?" I asked my parents. "Just until he finds a job and saves enough for his own place," my dad said vaguely. "A month or 2, maybe 3 at most." "And where is he supposed to sleep?" "The spare bedroom has my desk and drafting table, not a bed. We thought you could move those things to the living room for now," my mom suggested brightly. "Or maybe you could get a sleeper sofa for the living room, and Walter could take your bedroom." The audacity of her suggestion left me speechless. They expected me to give up my bedroom or rearrange my entire apartment to accommodate Walter, who had been given unrestricted access to my personal space without my knowledge or consent. "This isn't right," I finally said. "You know this isn't right." "Family helps family," my father replied, repeating the mantra from our lunch conversation. "Walter is going through a tough time, and you're in a position to help. That's what brothers do." "I never agreed to this," I said firmly. "Well, it's happening," my mom said with finality. "Give it a chance, Ignacio. You might find it's nice having company." They hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my now crowded living room, staring at my brother who was eating my leftover pizza straight from the refrigerator. "This is going to be awesome," Walter said with his mouth full. "Just like when we were kids sharing a room. Remember how much fun that was?" What I remembered was Walter borrowing my things without asking, leaving dirty clothes all over the floor, and staying up until 2 a.m. playing video games on school nights. But I was too stunned and angry to get into it with him right then. "We need to establish some ground rules," I said, trying to salvage what control I could from the situation. Sure, Walter agreed easily. "Whatever you say, bro. Hey, do you mind if I invite some friends over tonight to check out the new place? Nothing crazy, just a few people." And that's when I knew this arrangement was going to be even worse than I had imagined. The first week of living with Walter was every bit as difficult as I'd anticipated. He treated the apartment like a hotel, leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor, dishes in the sink, and his belongings scattered everywhere. He stayed up late watching television at full volume, invited friends over without asking, and borrowed my food, toiletries, and even my clothes without permission. I tried to establish boundaries: clean up after yourself. Ask before having guests, replace what you use. Walter would nod and agree, then completely ignore these rules 5 minutes later. Any attempt to remind him would be met with "Relax, bro. Don't be so uptight, or I'll do it later," with later, never seeming to arrive. What made it worse was that I had nowhere to escape to. My home office? My sanctuary, for working and unwinding, had been commandeered as Walter's bedroom. My drafting table and desk were now crammed into a corner of the living room, making the space cluttered and impractical. I couldn't concentrate on work with Walter constantly interrupting me or blasting music or talking loudly on the phone. But the biggest shock came exactly 2 weeks after Walter moved in. I received an email from my mother with the subject line, "Rent Adjustment." Opening it, I found a formal notice that my monthly rent would be increasing from $1.200 to $2.400, effective the following month. I called my parents immediately, hoping there was some mistake. "What is this about doubling my rent?" I demanded, when my father answered. "We need to discuss this in person," he replied calmly. "Can you come over for dinner tomorrow night?" "I want to discuss it now," I insisted. "Tomorrow, Ignacio. 6 o'clock. We'll explain everything then." I spent the next 24 hours in a state of anxious anger. There was no way I could afford to pay double my current rent. Even with my good engineering salary that would eat up more than half my monthly income after taxes. Plus, I was now sharing my space with an unwanted roommate who contributed nothing. It didn't make sense. The next evening, I arrived at my parents' house precisely at 6, determined to get answers. They were waiting for me in the dining room, a folder of papers neatly arranged on the table. "Let's eat first," my mother suggested, bringing out a casserole. "No," I said firmly. "I want to know what's going on with this rent increase first." My parents exchanged glances and my father cleared his throat. "We've reviewed our expenses for the apartment building, and we've determined that the current rent no longer covers our costs." "That's not true," I countered. "You've told me multiple times that the rent more than covers the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. Nothing has changed with the property expenses." My mother sighed. "Our circumstances have changed, Ignacio. We now have additional family expenses to consider." "What family expenses?" My father opened the folder and pulled out a spreadsheet. "Walter needs support while he's getting back on his feet. He can't contribute to rent right now, but he still needs a place to live. As his family, we all need to help." I stared at them in disbelief as understanding dawned. "You're doubling my rent to subsidize Walter living with me. Someone has to pay for him," my mother said matter-of-factly. "And since you're the one with a stable income—" "This is insane," I interrupted. "You've moved him into my apartment without my consent, disrupted my life and work, and now you expect me to pay for the privilege." "We expect you to help your brother during a difficult time," my father corrected. "The increased rent will cover Walter's portion of the living expenses, plus some additional funds to help him get back on his feet. So I'm not just paying for his housing. I'm giving him spending money too." I was incredulous. "Think of it as an investment in Walter's future," my mother suggested. "What about my future? What about the savings I've been putting aside for a down payment on my own place? Or the student loans I'm still paying off?" "You're doing well, Ignacio," my father said dismissively. "You can afford to help your brother." "This isn't help, it's exploitation," I said, my voice rising. "You're using me to enable Walter just like you've always done. The difference is now you're making me pay for it. Literally." "Don't be dramatic," my mother scolded. "It's temporary." "How temporary?" "A month, 6 months, a year." Walter has never held a job for more than 6 months at a time. What happens when he quits or gets fired from the next one? "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," my father said. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I can't afford to pay double my rent. It's not financially possible." "We've looked at your salary," my father countered. "You can make it work if you cut back on unnecessary expenses." The fact that they had calculated my ability to pay based on my salary as if they had any right to decide how I should spend my money pushed me over the edge. "This isn't happening," I said firmly. "I'm not paying double rent for half an apartment that I'm sharing with someone I didn't choose to live with." "Then what do you suggest?" my mother asked, her tone challenging. "Walter gets a job. Any job. and pays his own way. Or he moves back in with you until he can afford his own place. He can't live with us anymore, my father said quickly. It's not working out. And there it was. The real reason for this whole scheme. Walter had become too much for them to handle, so they had pawned him off on me. They couldn't tolerate living with him, but they expected me to do so happily. So, you kicked him out of your house and into mine because you couldn't stand living with him anymore? I asked, connecting the dots. My parents had the grace to look embarrassed, but they didn't deny it. He needs his own space, my mother said weakly. It's not his own space. It's my space that you've invaded, I countered. And now you want me to pay double for the displeasure. The rent increase is non-negotiable, my father said firmly. If you want to continue living in the apartment, those are the terms. I sat back in my chair, a strange calm settling over me, as I realized there was only one solution. Then I'll be moving out. My parents looked shocked, as if this possibility had never occurred to them. Don't be hasty, my mother said quickly. Where would you go on such short notice? I'll figure it out, I replied. I have friends. I have savings. I'll find a new place. You're overreacting, my father said. Just give the new arrangement a chance. I've given it 2 weeks, I said. It's not working. Walter is inconsiderate, messy, and disruptive. He eats my food, uses my things without asking, and has zero respect for my space or privacy. And now you want me to pay double for this experience. No, thank you. That's your choice, my father said, coldly sliding the rent increase notice across the table. But this takes effect next month, regardless of your decision. I stood up, leaving the untouched casserole on the table. Then, my decision is made. I'll be out by the end of the month. As I headed for the door, my mother called after me. What about your furniture? The apartment comes furnished. Remember? I turned back, confused. What are you talking about? I furnished that apartment myself. My parents exchanged another glance. Well, we assumed that since you're leaving so suddenly, you'd leave the furniture for Walter, my father said. It would be the considerate thing to do, and that's when I realized just how entitled they had become. Not only did they expect me to subsidize Walter's lifestyle, but they also expected me to leave behind all my possessions for him to use. Every piece of furniture in that apartment was purchased by me with my own money. I said slowly, making sure they understood. The sofa, the television, the dining table, the bed, all mine. And all of it is coming with me when I leave. The look of shock on their faces would have been comical if the situation wasn't so infuriating. But where will Walter sleep? What will he sit on? My mother asked, genuinely perplexed. That's not my problem, I replied. Maybe he can use some of that extra rent money you were planning to charge me to buy his own furniture. With that, I walked out, already mentally planning my escape from the apartment, and from the toxic family dynamic I had tolerated for far too long. The drive back to my apartment that night was a blur of emotions. Anger, betrayal, disappointment, but also surprisingly relief. For years I had been the good son, the responsible one who followed the rules and met expectations. In some ways, this final overreach by my parents was freeing. They had pushed too far, and in doing so released me from the obligation to continue being the person they could always count on to give in. When I arrived home, Walter was sprawled on my couch playing video games and surrounded by empty pizza boxes and beer cans. How'd dinner go? He asked without looking away from the screen. Great, I replied sarcastically. Mom and Dad want to double my rent to pay for you to live here. That got his attention. He paused the game and looked at me. Seriously? That's messed up. Is it? You didn't seem to think it was messed up when they gave you a key to my apartment without asking me. Walter had the decency to look uncomfortable. That wasn't my idea, man. They told me you were cool with it. Well, I wasn't, and I'm not. And I'm definitely not cool with paying double rent, so you can live here for free. So what are you going to do? He asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice. I'm moving out, I said simply. And I'm taking all my stuff with me. Walter's eyes widened. All of it. But where am I supposed to sleep? Not my problem, I replied, echoing what I'd told our parents. You've got until the end of the month to figure it out. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I needed time to research my options and make a plan. First, I reviewed my lease agreement carefully. As I suspected, there was nothing in it about additional occupants or rent increases during the lease term. If this had been a normal landlord-tenant relationship, what my parents were doing would be completely illegal. I called my friend Lisa, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in tenant rights. She confirmed what I already knew. I had a strong legal case against my parents, if I wanted to pursue it. But the thought of taking my own parents to court made my stomach churn. You don't have to sue them, Lisa advised. Just knowing you could might be enough leverage to negotiate a better exit. Next, I reached out to friends to see if anyone had a spare room I could crash in temporarily. My friend Aaron immediately offered his guest room. Stay as long as you need, he said. Honestly, I've been saying for years that your parents take advantage of you. It's about time you stood up to them. With a temporary landing spot secured, I began researching apartments in earnest. The rental market was tight, but I found a few promising options that were within my budget and available for immediate move-in. I scheduled viewings for the following day. Then I sat down and drafted a formal notice to vacate, stating clearly that I would be moving out by the end of the month, that I would be taking all my personal property, including all furniture and appliances that I had purchased, and that I expected my security deposit to be returned in full, as the apartment had been well maintained. I made 3 copies, one to email, one to mail, and one to hand deliver to my parents. I wanted there to be no ambiguity about my intentions. That evening, I drove to my parents' house to deliver the notice in person. They seemed surprised to see me so soon after our dinner confrontation. I've come to formally give you notice that I'm moving out, I said, handing them the envelope. Everything is detailed in there, but the key points are that I'll be gone by the end of the month, and I'll be taking all my belongings with me. All of them, my mother asked, frowning. But what about Walter? Walter is not my responsibility, I said firmly. If you want to help him, that's your choice. But I'm done being volunteered for that job. You're being selfish, my father accused. Family helps family. Family also respects boundaries, I countered. You didn't respect mine, so now I'm establishing new ones. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand why you're being so harsh. All we asked was for you to share your apartment temporarily and pay a bit more rent. You asked me to subsidize Walter's lifestyle at the expense of my own financial security and personal comfort, I corrected. That's not a reasonable request, and I'm not obligated to agree to it. What if we reconsider the rent increase my father offered, suddenly willing to negotiate now that he realized I was serious? You could still share the apartment with Walter, but at your current rent. I shook my head. That's not acceptable. I didn't want a roommate to begin with, especially not one who was forced on me without my consent. The issue isn't just the money. It's the complete disregard for my autonomy and boundaries. Where will you go? My mother asked, her tone suggesting I couldn't possibly survive without their help. I've already found several options, I replied. I'll be fine. And where will Walter go? My father demanded. That's for you and Walter to figure out. Just like it should have been from the beginning. The conversation went in circles from there. My parents cycled through guilt-tripping anger, bargaining, and back to guilt. But I stood firm. By the end of our conversation, they realized I wasn't going to change my mind. Fine, my father said eventually. But I think you're making a big mistake. You'll regret turning your back on family when you need us someday." "I'm not turning my back on family," I replied. "I'm refusing to be exploited by family. There's a difference." As I was leaving, my mother tried one last tactic. "What about the dining table? It was a housewarming gift from us. Surely you'll leave that for Walter." "The dining table was a birthday gift, not a housewarming gift," I corrected. "And gifts don't come with conditions. Once you give something to someone, it's theirs to do with as they please." With that, I left feeling both drained and strengthened by the confrontation. Back at the apartment, Walter was waiting anxiously. "Did you mean what you said about taking all the furniture?" he asked, as soon as I walked in. Every word I confirmed. "But where am I supposed to sleep? Where am I supposed to sit? What am I supposed to eat on?" "Those are excellent questions, Walter. Maybe it's time you asked Mom and Dad, or better yet, figured it out for yourself." For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw a flicker of real concern in Walter's eyes. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Without me to bail him out, without my furniture to use, without my food to eat, he would have to take responsibility for himself. "Look, bro," he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "I know things have been rough between us. I haven't been the best roommate. But we can work this out right. I'll clean up after myself. I'll be quiet when you're working. I'll buy my own food." "It's too late for that," I said. "I've already given notice. I've already found a new place. This isn't a negotiation tactic. I'm actually leaving." "But..." "No buts, Walter. For once in your life, you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. And Mom and Dad's actions." Without me cushioning the blow, the look of desperation on his face almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "Can you at least leave the couch?" he pleaded. "Just until I can get my own." I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "Number? The couch comes with me." "You're being petty," he accused. Maybe I admitted. "But after years of watching you get bailed out while I play by the rules, I think I've earned the right to be a little petty." Walter's demeanor shifted from pleading to angry. "Fine. Take your stupid furniture. I never liked your taste anyway. That couch is uncomfortable as hell. And yet you've had no problem sleeping on it for the past 2 weeks," I pointed out. He stormed off to the spare bedroom, my former office, and slammed the door. I could hear him on the phone immediately, after no doubt calling our parents to complain about my unreasonableness. Let him complain, I thought. For once, I wasn't going to be the one to give in to compromise to put everyone else's needs before my own. This time, I was choosing myself. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I found a new apartment. A 1-bedroom in a modern building across town. Slightly smaller than my current place, but with better amenities. And most importantly, no family strings attached. The rent was comparable to what I had been paying my parents, and the landlord was a professional property management company with clear policies and procedures. I signed the lease, paid the security deposit, and set my move-in date for the Saturday before the end of the month. With that secured, I turned my attention to the logistics of moving. First, I made a detailed inventory of everything I owned in the apartment. This wasn't just about being thorough. I wanted documentation in case my parents or Walter tried to claim anything was theirs. I took photos of each room and all major items, along with pictures of receipts for the bigger purchases. Next, I arranged for a moving company to handle the larger items, the sofa bed, dining table, and entertainment center. For the smaller things, I recruited Aaron and a few other friends to help, promising pizza and beer in return. As moving day approached, Walter became increasingly anxious. He split his time between pleading with me to leave certain items behind and angrily accusing me of being selfish. When neither approach worked, he started bringing home random pieces of furniture he'd found for free on Craigslist: a stained futon, a wobbly coffee table, a set of mismatched dining chairs. "See, I don't need your stuff," he said defiantly, as he dragged the futon into the living room, leaving scratches on the hardwood floor. Good for you, I replied, making a note to touch up the floor before I left. I'm glad you're problem-solving. The day before the move, my parents showed up unannounced at the apartment. I was in the middle of packing my kitchen items when they knocked. We need to talk, my father said as I let them in. His eyes scanned the apartment, taking in the stacks of boxes and the wrapping materials spread across the counter. I'm a little busy right now, I replied. This won't take long, my mother assured me. We've been thinking about the situation and we want to propose a compromise. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. We understand that you're upset about how things were handled, my father began. And we acknowledge that we should have discussed Walter moving in with you before it happened. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was closer than I expected to get. What we're proposing is this, he continued. You stay in the apartment. We'll keep the rent at the original amount. Walter can continue to live here, but he'll contribute by doing chores and cooking meals while he looks for a job. I almost laughed. So, I still have to live with Walter, who has proven to be a terrible roommate, but instead of paying extra money, I get the privilege of having him do chores that he probably won't actually do based on his track record. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone, my mother said, her tone slightly desperate. I already found a solution that works for me, I replied. I'm moving out tomorrow. But what about Walter, she asked. What about him? He's an adult. He can figure it out. He can't afford this place on his own, my father pointed out. Then he should find somewhere he can afford or get a job or move back in with you, I suggested. Those are all reasonable options. We can't have him back at our house, my mother said quickly. It's too disruptive. And yet you had no problem disrupting my life. My father's patience was wearing thin. Look, Ignacio, we're trying to be reasonable here. Can't you meet us halfway? I've been meeting you more than halfway for years, I replied. I've been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems. And how was I rewarded? By having my space invaded, my boundaries violated, and my finances exploited. So, no, I can't meet you halfway this time. My mother noticed the inventory list I had on the counter. What's this? A list of everything I own in this apartment with photos and receipts were available, I explained. Just so there's no confusion about what's mine when I move out. She picked it up and scanned it, her frown deepening. You're really taking everything. The microwave, the shower curtain, the living room lamps. I purchased all of those things, I confirmed. But Walter will need a microwave, she protested. Then Walter can buy a microwave, I replied simply. My father's face reddened with anger. This is spite, pure and simple. No, this is a natural consequence, I corrected. You chose to move Walter into my apartment without my consent. You chose to try to double my rent, to subsidize his lifestyle. You chose to assume I would leave my possessions behind for him to use. Those were your choices, and these are the consequences. We're your parents, my mother said, as if that fact alone should grant them immunity from consequences. Yes, you are, and I love you both, but that doesn't give you the right to treat me the way you have. They left shortly after, my father storming out and my mother in tears. I felt a twinge of guilt, but reminded myself that I hadn't created this situation. They had. Moving day arrived bright and early. The moving company showed up at 8 a.m. to begin loading the larger furniture. My friends arrived an hour later to help with the boxes and smaller items. Walter was notably absent, having chosen to spend the night elsewhere rather than watch the dismantling of the apartment. We were about halfway through the move when my parents showed up again, this time with Walter in tow. Stop what you're doing, my father demanded. Some of these items belong to the apartment. I sighed, having anticipated this attempt. No, they don't. Everything being moved is mine. The refrigerator stays, he insisted. It came with the apartment. Actually, it didn't. I corrected, pulling out my inventory and the receipt for the refrigerator I had purchased 2 years earlier when the original one broke down. I bought this refrigerator to replace the old one that stopped working. You said you didn't want to pay for a new one, so I did. My father looked surprised, as if he'd forgotten this detail. What about the washer and dryer my mother tried? Those definitely came with the apartment. Yes, they did, I agreed. And they're staying. They're not on my inventory list. Walter stepped forward, pointing at the television being carefully wrapped by the movers. That television was a Christmas gift from all of us to you. It's not just yours. It was a gift to me, I emphasized. Which makes it mine. That's how gifts work, Walter. One by one, they challenged items on my list, and one by one I proved ownership through receipts, photos, or their own reluctant admissions. By the time we had gone through everything, even they had to concede that every item I was taking legitimately belonged to me. This isn't right, my father muttered, watching as the last of my furniture was loaded onto the truck. It is right, I countered. It's exactly right. For the first time, in this whole situation, something is being handled fairly and correctly. As I did a final walkthrough of the now empty apartment, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness at the breakdown in my relationship with my family, anger at how I had been treated, but also a profound sense of liberation. This apartment had been my home for 3 years, but it had also been a symbol of my continued dependence on my parents, a tether that allowed them to exert control over my life in ways I had never fully acknowledged until now. Walter stood in the empty living room looking lost. What am I supposed to do now? He asked, his anger giving way to genuine distress. For a moment I felt sorry for him. He had been enabled his entire life, never forced to face the reality of adult responsibilities. In some ways, our parents had failed him more profoundly than they had ever failed me. You figure it out, Walter, I said, not unkindly. That's what adults do. I handed the keys to my father, signed the paperwork to officially end my tenancy, and walked out. My friends were waiting in their cars, ready to follow the moving truck to my new apartment. As I closed the door behind me, I felt like I was closing a chapter of my life, one where I had allowed others to determine my worth and set my boundaries. The new chapter was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one holding the pen. The first few nights in my new apartment were strange. The space was different, the sounds unfamiliar, and the knowledge that I had made such a dramatic break from my family left me with a mix of emotions. There were moments when I questioned my decision, wondering if I had overreacted or been too harsh. But then I would remember the entitlement in my parents' voices, when they announced they were doubling my rent to subsidize Walter, or the invasion of privacy when they gave him a key without my knowledge, and my resolve would strengthen again. Financially, the move had been a strain. There was the security deposit for the new place, the moving costs, and some unexpected expenses for things I hadn't realized I needed. My savings took a hit, pushing back my timeline for eventually buying my own home. But the freedom and peace of mind that came with the new arrangement were worth every penny. For the first 2 weeks after I moved out, I didn't hear from my parents or Walter. Then gradually the communication attempts began. First came texts from my mother, casual inquiries about how I was doing and if I liked the new place. I responded politely but briefly, maintaining a distance I had never before imposed in our relationship. Walter texted next, his messages alternating between resentment, "Thanks for leaving me with nothing, bro," and thinly veiled attempts to get help. "Do you know any cheap places that are hiring?" I directed him to job search websites and offered to review his resume, but made it clear that financial assistance was off the table. My father was the last to reach out, his approach more direct. "Your mother misses you. When are you coming for Sunday dinner?" I didn't respond immediately, taking time to consider what kind of relationship I wanted with my family moving forward. After careful thought, I replied, "I need some time and space right now. When I'm ready to visit, I'll let you know." About a month after the move, I heard through family grapevine that Walter had moved back in with our parents. Apparently, he couldn't afford to keep the apartment on his own, even with the reduced rent they had offered him after I left. This news gave me a complicated feeling of vindication. I had been right that Walter wasn't ready for independent living. But I took no joy in seeing my predictions come true. 2 months after that, at my cousin's wedding, I saw my parents and Walter for the first time since the move. The encounter was awkward, but civil. My mother hugged me tightly. My father shook my hand with formal politeness, and Walter gave me a nod from across the room but didn't approach. My Aunt Carla, my mother's sister, pulled me aside during the reception. "I heard what happened," she said. "Your parents didn't tell me, but Walter complained to everyone who would listen." I braced myself for criticism or a lecture about family loyalty. "I want you to know," she continued, "surprising me that Robert and I think you did the right thing." Uncle Robert nodded in agreement. "They took advantage of you, plain and simple. It was wrong, and they know it, even if they won't admit it. Their support meant more to me than I could express. It was validation that I wasn't crazy, that my feelings were justified, and that standing up for myself wasn't selfish or wrong." "Walter's been job hunting for real this time," Aunt Carla added. "Your parents finally gave him an ultimatum: find work within 3 months, or move out for good. I think seeing you refuse to be his safety net shocked them into reevaluating their approach." This was unexpected but welcome news. Perhaps some good had come from the conflict after all. Over the following months, I slowly rebuilt my relationship with my parents on new terms. We started with occasional phone calls, then progressed to meeting for coffee in neutral locations. Eventually, I accepted an invitation to Sunday dinner, my first time back in their home since the confrontation. "We owe you an apology," my father said stiffly as we sat down to eat. It clearly wasn't easy for him to admit he had been wrong. "We shouldn't have moved Walter into your apartment without your consent," my mother added. "And we shouldn't have tried to make you financially responsible for him. We thought we were helping Walter." My father continued, "But we were actually hurting him by not forcing him to stand on his own feet." It wasn't a perfect apology. There was still an undercurrent of justification in their words, but it was sincere and I accepted it as such. "I appreciate that," I said. "I hope we can move forward with better communication and more respect for each other's boundaries." We'd like that. My mother agreed, relief evident in her voice. Walter wasn't at dinner that night, but I ran into him a few weeks later at a local coffee shop. He was in a uniform for a delivery service on his lunch break from what he told me was his first steady job in over a year. "Look," he said awkwardly, "I was pissed at you for a long time about the apartment thing. But I get it now. You were right. I needed to get my act together. How's it going?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It's hard," he admitted. "Working regular hours, having responsibilities, budgeting my money. It's all new to me. But it's also kind of good. I don't know. I feel like I'm actually accomplishing something for once." "That's great, Walter," I said, and I meant it. "I'm saving up for my own place," he continued. "A small studio to start. Mom and Dad are matching what I save, but only after I show them 3 months of steady employment." I nodded, approving of the approach. "That sounds like a solid plan." "I owe you an apology too," he said, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I shouldn't have expected you to support me. It wasn't fair." Coming from Walter, who had rarely taken responsibility for anything in his life, this apology meant a lot. "Thanks," I said simply. "I appreciate that." As for me, the whole experience had changed me in profound ways. I had always thought of myself as independent because I paid my own bills and managed my own career. But true independence, I realized, wasn't just financial. It was also having the courage to set boundaries, to say no to unreasonable demands, and to prioritize my own well-being, even when it disappointed others. My new apartment became a symbol of this newfound independence. I took pride in creating a space that was entirely mine, decorated according to my taste with no compromise required. I established a proper home office again where I could work without interruption. I hosted friends for dinner parties and game nights, building a community of supportive relationships based on mutual respect. Professionally, I thrived as well. Without the stress and distraction of the Walter situation, I was able to focus more fully on my work. 6 months after the move, I received a promotion and a substantial raise. Ironically, more than enough to have covered the doubled rent my parents had tried to impose. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself, my instincts, my judgment, my worth. I stopped second-guessing my right to set boundaries or questioning whether my needs were valid. This newfound self-confidence extended beyond my family relationships into all areas of my life. Looking back now, I can see that what felt like a devastating betrayal was actually a painful but necessary catalyst for growth. My parents' actions forced me to confront patterns of enabling and exploitation that had existed in our family for years. By refusing to participate any longer, I not only freed myself, but also created an opportunity for Walter to finally grow up and for my parents to reassess their parenting approach. Do I regret standing my ground and moving out? Not for a second. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most important. Sometimes the people who love us the most can also be the ones who take advantage of our love and goodwill. Recognizing when that's happening and having the courage to say no more isn't selfish. It's essential for creating healthy, balanced relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Family is important, but family relationships need to be built on respect, consideration, and healthy boundaries. When those elements are missing, even the strongest family bonds can become toxic. Learning to love your family while still protecting yourself from exploitation is perhaps one of the most difficult but valuable lessons in adult life. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took advantage of your kindness? Drop a comment below sharing your experience and how you handled it. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for themselves, even against family. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to draw a clear line in the sand.